never saw it coming. Alex had always been my best friend, my confidant, the person I trusted most. For 3 years, we had shared an apartment, countless meals, and late-night conversations that blurred the line between sleep and wakefulness. Ours was the kind of friendship built on instinct, understanding each other without needing words. But looking back now, I wonder if I had missed the warning signs or simply chosen to ignore them. A bond that felt unbreakable. We met during our sophomore year of college. I needed a roommate, and he needed an escape from his overcrowded dorm. At first, we were just 2 guys splitting rent, but our dynamic evolved fast. Alex had a way of making the mundane feel significant. A grocery run became an adventure. A night in became a marathon of inside jokes. He was the kind of person who remembered how I liked my coffee, who noticed when I was off before I even spoke. It felt effortless, comfortable, until suddenly it wasn't. It started subtly. The way his laughter would linger a second longer when I was around. The small touches, adjusting my collar, nudging my shoulder, that felt increasingly deliberate. The way he seemed to study my face when he thought I wasn't looking. At the time, I told myself it was nothing. That Alex was just affectionate, in a way some people were. The first cracks in the foundation. Then I met David. We weren't serious, just a few casual dates. But for some reason, Alex's demeanor shifted the moment I mentioned him. He still smiled, still laughed, but his eyes had lost their usual warmth. One night, as we sat on the couch, he casually asked, "So, this David guy, you really into him?" I shrugged, taking a sip of my drink. "Yeah, I think so. He's great." Alex nodded, but something flickered across his face, something I couldn't place. "Just be careful," he said after a moment. "People aren't always what they seem." It was such an odd comment, coming from someone who had never been cynical before. I brushed it off, but I couldn't ignore the shift that followed. Unspoken words, unavoidable tension. The late-night conversations became shorter, the laughter less frequent. Alex stopped suggesting movie nights and started retreating into his room more. When I did see him, he seemed distracted, lost in thoughts he never shared. One evening, as I was getting ready for a date, I caught him watching me from the doorway. "You look good," he said, his voice quieter than usual. I smiled. "Thanks." Something in his expression faltered before he looked away. Guess David's lucky. I wanted to say something, to ask if he was okay, but before I could, he disappeared into his room. It wasn't until later, long after I had left for my date, that I realized his door had remained shut the entire night. The moment that changed everything. The next morning, things felt normal again. Or at least, Alex pretended they were. We ate breakfast together, made small talk, and everything felt almost right. Almost. But later that night, as I scrolled through my phone, a message popped up from David. "Hey, I don't know what's going on, but I think we should take a step back." Confused, I called him. He sounded distant, guarded. When I pressed for answers, all he said was, someone made me realize some things. I need to think." The call ended, leaving me staring at the screen in disbelief. Had I done something wrong? Said something? I ran through every interaction, trying to make sense of it. Then, out of nowhere, Alex spoke from the doorway. "Rough night." I looked up, startled. He leaned against the frame, arms crossed, watching me with an unreadable expression. David just broke things off, I admitted, still dazed. Alex nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "I'm sorry. I should have noticed it then," the way his apology lacked surprise. The way his gaze held something deeper. But I didn't. Not yet. For that moment, all I could do was sit in silence, completely unaware that the person I trusted most had already betrayed me. The air inside the apartment felt different that night. Thicker, heavier, charged with something I couldn't name. It had been hours since David's vague breakup message, yet the words still looped in my mind, unanswered and unresolved. Alex had been strangely quiet since our brief exchange. Now, as I sat on the couch, staring blankly at my phone, he emerged from the kitchen with a glass in hand, his steps deliberate. He settled onto the armchair across from me, cradling a half-empty bottle of whiskey. The dim light caught the sharp angles of his face, casting shadows beneath his eyes. "You still thinking about him?" he asked, voice low. "What else would I be thinking about?" I shot back, sharper than intended. Alex didn't flinch. Instead, he took a slow sip, watching me with that same unreadable expression. "Maybe it's for the best," he said after a moment. I frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" He sighed, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "Just that. Maybe you weren't seeing things clearly. Maybe David wasn't right for you." A flicker of unease tightened my chest. "You barely even know him, Alex." "I know you," he countered. Something in the way he said it, too firm, too certain, sent a chill down my spine. "Alex." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Did you say something to him?" For the first time, Alex looked away, his jaw tightening. That was all the confirmation I needed. I sat up straighter. "Tell me you didn't." Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. "He wasn't right for you," Alex finally muttered, his voice eerily calm. A slow, dawning horror crept through me. "What did you do?" A shattered truth. Alex exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples before meeting my gaze. He didn't look guilty. He looked relieved. "I just made sure he saw the truth." "The truth?" My voice rose, disbelief turning to anger. "That he didn't really know you," Alex said simply. "That he wasn't the one who's always been there. That someone else, someone who actually cares, has been right in front of you this whole time." The room spun. "You manipulated him," I whispered. "I made him think," Alex corrected. "And he realized he wasn't what you needed." A cold, nauseating wave of realization settled over me. "You ruined it," I said, barely above a whisper. Alex leaned forward, his eyes dark and intense. "I saved you." The breaking point. I shot to my feet, rage bubbling beneath my skin. "You had no right." Alex stood too, voice rising to match mine. "No right. I've been there for you through everything. Watching you fall for people who never saw you the way I do, pretending it didn't tear me apart." I shook my head, stepping back. "This isn't love, Alex. Love doesn't destroy. It doesn't manipulate." His expression flickered, like he hadn't expected those words to cut as deep as they did. "I did this for us," he said, voice softer now. "I thought, maybe if David was out of the way, you'd finally see it." I stared at him, searching for the friend I once knew. But all I saw was someone who had crossed a line he could never undo. "You didn't do this for us," I said, my voice steadier now. "You did this for yourself." Alex's breath hitched, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. For the first time, he looked afraid, not of losing me, but of facing what he had done. A silence settled between us, deeper than any before. "I can't stay here," I murmured, the weight of the betrayal settling into my bones. Alex didn't stop me as I turned away. He didn't beg or plead, because deep down he knew he had already lost. The silence that followed felt heavier than the betrayal itself. Alex stood motionless, his face unreadable, but his eyes told a different story. A storm of emotions barely restrained, a quiet plea hidden beneath his defiance. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to care. Not anymore. I turned away, my chest tight with anger, betrayal, and something far worse. The loss of the person I had trusted most. "I'm leaving." The words fell between us like a final blow. A friendship beyond repair. Alex let out a shaky breath. "Don't do this." I clenched my jaw. "You already did." He took a step closer, desperation creeping into his voice. "I made a mistake, okay? But I did it because you wanted control," I interrupted. "Because you thought you could decide who I should love." Alex flinched as if I had struck him. "That's not fair. Neither was what you did." I forced myself to keep moving, my hands shaking as I grabbed an empty duffel bag from my closet. I shoved in clothes, not caring if they were folded, not caring where I would go, only knowing that I couldn't stay. Alex hovered near the doorway, his breath uneven. "Where will you go?" "Anywhere but here." He exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked truly afraid, not of losing our friendship, but of losing me completely. "Please," he said, voice raw. "Don't leave like this. Not without at least hearing me out." I froze, my grip tightening around the bag. A last attempt at redemption. I turned, meeting his gaze one last time. You want me to hear you out? My voice was quiet but firm. Then tell me this, when you sent those messages, when you manipulated David into walking away, did you ever once stop to think about what I wanted? Alex's mouth opened, then closed. That moment of hesitation was all the answer I needed. I nodded, the last piece of my heart breaking. That's what I thought. I swung the bag over my shoulder and brushed past him. He didn't try to stop me this time. Maybe he finally understood that some things can't be undone. A goodbye without closure. As I stepped into the hallway, I hesitated. I could feel him watching me, standing there like a man who had just realized the cost of his actions. I never wanted to hurt you, he said softly. I sighed, my back still turned. But you did. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing the chapter of us forever. As I walked away, my chest ached, not just from what I had lost, but from the realization that some love stories don't end in romance. Some end in ruin.